Hello, everyone. Thank you, a huge thank you for joining us today for a discussion on what does an effective cloud strategy look like. This is a LeadDev webinar created in partnership with Do IT and Google Cloud. The webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the LeadDev Slack to answer some of your questions in the technical hyphen strategy channel. We may also have time to answer a couple of questions live, so please do submit those via the Q&A feature of Zoom, and we'll get to them if we can towards the end. Or actually, if a question feels relevant in a moment, I'll bring it up. So let's start with some introductions. My name is Asim Hussein. I'm the moderator, and today I'll be joined by Michelle from GitHub, Frank from Google, and Joel from Do IT. I'll ask each of you to introduce yourselves now. So Michelle, why don't you go first?
Sure. Hi, my name is Michelle Totolo. I am a principal software engineer at GitHub. I currently work in the compute products org. So that is the org that does actions, code spaces, packages, NPM, all that sort of stuff. I've been at GitHub for almost 6 months now. Before that, I was at Square, aka Block, for over 4 years, where I worked on the cloud infrastructure team, and I have some cloud experience previously. So at this point, I've worked with both AWS, GCP, and Azure.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Michelle. And Frank, when you go next?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Lamar. I'm a senior privacy engineer on Google Cloud. I work on the cloud operations and engineering team, ensuring that all of the data that Google has about its cloud customers is protected in a privacy enhanced way. I previously, before Google, was a software engineer at various companies, have lived through about 4 cloud migrations in the past, and like Michelle, I've experienced them all. Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, all the major providers. And now it's interesting that I'm sitting on the other side of the table, kind of get to see how everything's made.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on some of your answers to some of the questions, Frank. And finally, Joel, why don't you go ahead and give an introduction to yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Joel Goodman. I'm a staff cloud architect from Do It International. I lead a team of architects and engineers, and we support our customers with consulting and support across all the clouds, AWS, Google, Azure. Before working at Do It, I was a customer engineer and solution architect at Google for 3 years, supporting customers in the corporate and enterprise segments, helping with cloud migrations from AWS to GCP, from on-prem to GCP, from on-prem monolithic to on GCP microservices. So a wider range. And before that, I even had the pleasure of working with Bluemix for a little bit. But that's my background.
Wonder we have all the clouds and a half covered. And thank you all. I'm very excited to moderate this discussion. The audience may have noticed my voice. I have come down with the flu. My brain isn't as sharp as it normally is, so bear with me. Or maybe it's a lie. Maybe this is exactly how sharp my brain is all the time. So there are many areas we can cover, in this space. So I think one way of tying this all, together is to talk about, cloud governance with respect to cloud migration. Perhaps both, on-prem to cloud, but maybe also, Joel, you just mentioned it, kind of migrating from one cloud to another as well, or multi-cloud, or those angles. So feel free to kind of give your answers with that framework in mind. I think that'd be quite useful. I think the migrations are almost the most stressful things in our space. They're far more stressful than anything greenfield. So I think a lot of audience will care about the answer to this. So Yeah, so I'd like to find out from our panelists the advice they would give to others, regarding some of these challenges. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to try and level set everybody to make sure we're all aligned. Let's make sure when we use some of this terminology, we're all kind of singing from the same or reading from the same sheet. So I'm going to ask you to all three the same question. And it's okay, you can agree with the previous person if they've already said, the answers already. So Michelle, let's start off with you. Like, what does cloud governance mean to you?
There's three aspects that I think about. So first is policies. So what cloud provider do you use? How do you use it? Are you in one giant account? Are you in multi-account? All of those things. Then you have procedures. So how do you go about, say, purchasing a reserved instance plan? What's your threshold for getting finance involved, if anything? And then third is the technical side, in terms of what are you going to support and what are you not going to support? There are some companies that just kind of give engineers full reign and they're just like, go. But there are also other companies where you can't necessarily do that for various reasons, in terms of legal challenges, in terms of regulatory environments, or just in terms of the fact that you want to limit the scope of what your internal teams use for technology, because AWS has 200 and something products at this point. An internal team can't help support all of those, and even if you have a good relationship with your cloud provider, they still get really scattered. So those are kind of the three things I think about. So policy, process, and then the technical side.
Policy, process, and technical. Yeah, good way of looking at it. Yeah, I like that. Frank, do you have any? How do you feel about that explanation? Do you agree? Do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I guess a very good explanation is keeping things in threes. It's very, very simple to kind of count off and remember those.
Yeah.
I think about it, there are many governance frameworks out there, and you're free to choose the best one that kind of suits you and kind of fits the needs of your particular business. What works for a large retailer, it's not going to work for a small consulting firm. I think they kind of boil down essentially, to expand on that just a little bit, they kind of boil down into money, how much is this going to cost me, identity, who can access what and where, compliance, privacy and security, making sure that all of this money that you're making and saving by going to the cloud isn't going right back out the door to regulators. Resources, now that you're going to have your applications running on someone else's computer, what's that going to look like? And then software supply chain. How do you get the ideas from the whiteboard into the hands of your customers? These all seem familiar. You're already doing this stuff. The things that you do in cloud governance are the things, if you've been in business more than a month, you're already doing all these things. Just now when you're doing them in the cloud, there's just some added dimensions that you have to watch out for.
Yeah, good additions. Yeah. Joel, anything you'd like to add? What's your thoughts on cloud governance? Completely different to everybody else's.
No, I agree, but I'll pile on a little bit. So I think from I agree wholeheartedly with what Frank said around security and so on. I would add that another aspect of the governments to be aware of is cost management, right? How do you govern, what's being spent on what, how much, what are our budgets, what are our thresholds, and so on. And the one thing I would touch on policies, because I 100% agree with it, that's one of the key legs, is a lot of people hear policy and they're like, okay, we have to make a document and people have to come to a committee and then you have to go through this, and that's not good. That'll slow you down in your cloud journey. What I would recommend that people think about policies is how do you implement them as code and allow the teams to work without having to go through 7 hoops in order to get a VM up and running in the cloud. So those are a bit of pile-on what my colleague said.
No, it's good. I like the idea of policies as code, actually, because code is just the rules for how you engage. So putting it in that structure makes sense. Yeah. So let's stick with you, Joel. So we've kind of like level set on kind of cloud governance and kind of got everybody's viewpoints on that. When, like you mentioned, you've done a number of cloud migrations. What are the risks when migrating to the cloud?
So it's a complicated question. I think a lot of people off the bat will think, oh, security, and those type of things. But I think that's a valid concern. But I think when I'm looking at a cloud migration and moving to the cloud, I think the biggest risk to a successful cloud migration is internal change management and bringing your people along for the ride. So, for example, if you're on-prem or on AWS and you tell people, now you're taking your entire application, moving it to the cloud in a month, good luck. That's a massive risk to the project being successful. Other thing is setting expectations with your stakeholders, both up, horizontal, down, and timeline. So, for example, it's not take it from, if you have a monolith on-prem and you move it to the cloud as is, don't expect a massive change in how fast you can ship changes, how fast your application can be more secure, be more resilient, and so on. So setting the expectations of moving to the cloud is a journey. Yes, lift and shift is one part of it, but not all of it. And second is timeline, understanding that people, even if they're on AWS or a different cloud and they're moving to Google Cloud, it takes them time to learn things. So you have to give people the time to learn the technology, come up to speed, and grow at a pace that people can work at. So those are the biggest risks to cloud migrations from my perspective.
No, I like that. That's a good point. I love the point about people. I always say, like, it's a brave CTO that goes against what their staff is already telling them. So, bringing your staff along for a ride is really important. So, Michelle, same to you. Are there any other risks that you can think of from a cloud migration perspective, or do you have any comments on what Joel said? Yeah.
No, I think Joel had a really great overall summary, but there's one thing that I kind of want to dig a little bit deeper on, and that's expectation management, as well as accountability, because we have these internal platform teams, DevOps teams, I don't care what term you use, and they can't be the only ones doing a cloud migration. As Joel said, you have to take everyone along with you. So, if you're a smaller company, you have 50, 100, maybe 200 engineers, it's not going to be that bad. When you get to the scale of companies that I've worked at, GitHub, Square, I also worked at Capital One at one point, where Capital One had more engineers when I was there than GitHub currently has as employees, like period. Wow. So massive differences there. So your strategies have to be flexible, but you need to set up accountability so that people know what they're responsible for. They have executive buy-in from the top down, because a lift and shift is still going to be disruptive. So depending on how your technology stack worked, how your platform works, it's not necessarily flip a switch off and then, or flip a switch on, then flip a switch off. It's a lot more complicated than that, because it is, to some extent, a replatforming. So having that accountability upwards, downwards, and horizontally is really important, and making sure everyone knows who's responsible for what, especially again when it comes to cost, because we all know these big lift and shift migrations, you take your giant thing, you plop it on a bunch of VMs, it's not going to save you a lot of money. Where you really start getting a lot of those cost benefits, as most people know, is when you start using a lot of the managed services and auto scaling and all those sorts of things. So that's the only thing I wanted to add.
No, that's I like that. Especially, I find a lot, like once you're starting the technical aspects of a cloud migration, you're after all of the sales and all those conversations. So then you have to have that more realistic conversation of expectation management, because I always say, like, cloud is the opportunity to do good, it's not good by itself, right? It's the opportunity you finally get given a chance to architect it differently. So we just talked about some of the risks and some of the challenges to a cloud migration. Frank, can I ask you, what are some those are some of the risks, that's some of the fear. What are some of the governance strategies for mitigating that risk? Can you think of something? Yeah, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so kind of going back to the governance strategy for mitigating some of those risks. I think one is really being clear on your why. Why are you migrating to the cloud? Are you just doing it because it's trendy or because the competitor is doing it? Like having a clear organizational goal and vision around which you're doing that, and socializing and publicizing and getting buy-in from it. Like Joel mentioned, you tell your engineers that they're going to need to deploy an Amazon AWS in the next 30 days. Are they ready for that? Are they properly skilled to be able to handle that? Type of migration. Another key thing that I think is important for managing or mitigating that risk is to really take some time to think about the privacy and security. So I'm a privacy guy, so I got to throw the privacy and security piece in there. To think about what the migration is going to mean for your business and for your customers in terms of privacy and security. Do you now have to consider regionalization? Are there going to be GDPR or other regulatory concerns that you need to consider and to build for that? Are you going to need to process certain customers' data in certain regions? I think another piece of that is also important for mitigating the risk, and this is something I've personally been dealing with recently, is trying to make processes as standard as possible across your organization. And this can, when it comes to resource management, when a employee spins up a VM, how is that VM configured? What OS can or cannot, what can or cannot run on that VM, and what libraries are going to be pre-installed, things like that. Joel touched on it earlier with compliance as code. Being able to automate these processes helps it to scale well and makes it easier to do this across large scale organizations. And one of the keys that I see, or one of the hurdles that I commonly see or have seen in the past with that, is around data governance specifically, not actually knowing who owns or is responsible for which pieces of data, and then having that data properly annotated so that if you have your security policies, your privacy policies as code, you know which actual data sets to apply those to.
Oh, I see. So if you're like on-prem, you should know, like, you should annotate your data on-prem so that when you go into the cloud, you know what criteria there is for data, how to store it, how to comply with it. I see. There's a lot of preparation then that goes beforehand. Yeah.
And that kind of ties back into that why. You've kind of got your why for your organization and your strategic vision of why you're going to the cloud. Then you take time to actually think about how are we going to actually do that? What is this going to look like?
That's a good. I would have hoped that people have a lot of really great reasons for moving into the cloud or doing any of these migrations, because they're quite challenging. But yeah, it's always good to socialize that. That might be what's missing with bringing your staff forward with you, is not having the why. So that's a very good point. So Michelle, let me point that question back at you also. So any risks that you can think of, any other risks you can think of to oh no, sorry, I've gone to the wrong question. So Michelle, but it's still you. Michelle, what are some governance strategies? What are same question to Frank? What are some governance strategies for mitigating that risk?
Yeah, I think kind of piggybacking on what Frank said, cloud governance relies heavily on really strong partnerships. So knowing your data strategy, what data is covered by GDPR, what data is covered by SOX, what data is PCI, what is other, do you deal with healthcare information for children? Knowing all of that stuff is really important. And then finding the people in your organization to work with on a more permanent basis, because it's not just about the engineering teams understanding cloud, it's about finance. So they can do forecasting, they can do cost, they can help with cost analysis. Obviously, they're not going to know everything, but just turn everything off doesn't usually work for saving costs in the cloud, because then nothing's working. But you also need legal, you also need procurement, you also need the folks who are on your audit, and obviously your privacy and security folks as well. And getting a group of people that you, as the person kind of helping with cloud governments or leading this change, helps them create that expertise, I found to be one of the most valuable things. Because, you know, you as one person can't know all of the intimate details of PCI and SOX. And I've gone through audits for both of those in cloud. And I'm so glad that I had people along who were very curious and would ask, what does this mean? How is that different from this other thing you were doing before? So those partnerships ended up being really key in being successful, just because, you know, everyone has specialized knowledge, and the cloud is just, they need to figure out how to work cloud into what they already know in their specialized area.
I think I'm hearing a very common theme amongst everybody here, which is like, it's not just, you've got to bring everybody with you, and you've got to speak to a lot of people, I suppose, because the cloud migration is going to touch everybody, and you're not going to know everything yourself at all. So Frank, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I want to add to what Michelle said. I think the call out that she had there about the finance piece was really great, because one of the reasons that, you know, people are interested in the cloud is because they want to save money. It's going to be cheaper, but that finance piece has to be thought of and considered in a different way. You're not going to be building data centers anymore, and data centers, the infrastructure, the equipment that was your own, is going to be financed and looked at a different way. Like a data center is going to fall under CapEx, and that's going to give you certain tax benefits and depreciation and all these things. But your cloud costs are actually going to be OpEx, and they're going to look a little bit different. So you want to have people that have deep knowledge of how this stuff works and bring them to the conversation, as well as stay on top of your billing as you go.
That's interesting. Yeah, definitely. We're covering a lot more on kind of cost and finance aspects of it. But yeah, I've got a couple of other questions around that later. Frank, let's stick with you. So we've spoken about some governance strategies, and you've given some. I think there's some things mentioned about some things perhaps not to do. But like, do you have any, like, you have a lot of experience? I mean, you mentioned in the past. What are some anti-patterns? Not what you should do. What shouldn't you do when it comes to migration? What are some pitfalls and anti-patterns when it comes to migration?
I would say one of the first pitfalls, kind of going back to the finance and the billing piece of it, is not having billing alerts enabled for your cloud provider. You should alert on billing early and often. You also want to make sure that those alerts are going to the right people. If that billing alert is going to someone who is far removed from the project or program that's kind of generating or using those resources, they may not have an appreciation for what's going on, and maybe cap or limit what you're doing, or they may not be aware of what's going on when something looks out of the ordinary, and then things need to be shut down or capped at a specific place. So yeah, alert early and often, and also make sure that you are alerting the right people. I would say another key piece is resource catalogs. Knowing what applications you have and knowing where they are is another. Not only you need to know kind of where your stuff is in the cloud, you also want to understand. Pardon me. You also want to understand how these things relate and interconnect with each other, so that you aren't creating, because when it's all in your data center, when it's all in that one particular place, service discovery can be easier. But now you're in a public cloud environment or a hybrid cloud environment, you have things spread all over the place. And so you want to make sure that, not only are these things managed well, and that you kind of know what you have going on in the cloud, You also want to make sure that you don't have any conflicts, or also that you're not duplicating resources. Do you have 7 different services that all calculate the tax rate for a customer that you're going to charge for your service that you're selling? Can you consolidate that down to one and kind of save on resources, your footprint, as well as the billing piece of it? And then I'll say that another big thing is identity management, knowing who can access what. Giving default global access to every part of your organization is probably not a good idea, but you want to give developers the right amount of access to be able to do their jobs and for this to not be a hindrance to them, but not the amount of access where people could cause problems in other parts of the organization, because they're poking around. Developers are curious people.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I like that. I think I remember early on in my career, I mean, you'd be hunting around for a server to run on. And so when and then if other people are trying to take your server away from you, so like there was no danger of a proliferation of servers. Whereas now we kind of have that problem. I think it's it's the advantage of the cloud, but it also, if you're not careful, can be a big disadvantage. I know we've mentioned billing several times. We're going to get to it.
Yeah, I think a good IAM strategy is going to look very similar to your organizational chart and how things are organized and segmented.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. So Joel, let's go back to you. Same question to you. Like, what are some common anti-patterns? Tell us your horror stories. Like, what are some of the things that you've seen that people shouldn't do anymore? Oh, you're on mute.
Apologies. There's quite a few. So I'll start with a saying that I really like from some smart people, Martin Fowler, if anyone's heard it. Him and Sam Newman have written great books on application modernization and how to do these things. And the saying is, if you do a big bang rewrite, the only thing you're guaranteed of is a big bang. And I cannot iterate that enough for people migrating to the cloud. If you try and do things too fast in a big bang, that's what you're going to get. Might be good, 90% chance it's going to be bad. So what I would say is, that takes 2 parts, right? Trying to make too large of a change to an existing system in too short of a time. That's the big bang, essentially. The other part is setting your expectations of what you will achieve from moving to the cloud and moving to the cloud plus modernizing. So I've seen quite a few customers where they say, okay, we're going to move to the cloud. We're going to take this monolithic application. We're going to make it Kubernetes, microservices. Everything's going to be amazing. Profit. Doesn't work like that. It's a really difficult system to learn. There is lots of change management that needs to be handled, from upskilling the team, from learning the processes. Think about if you're running a monolithic application on a single VM versus parts of that application dispersed across 20 or 30 nodes running in different regions. As you build in functionality, there's exponential complexity that comes with that. So just setting your expectations right of what you can achieve, and also defining what you want. So do you want to move to Kubernetes and microservices because that's cool, or because you want to deliver things faster, you want it more secure, and you want it more reliable? And then make the decisions based on that. How can you mitigate these things, right? Not just complaining about the horror stories that I've had. Mm-hmm. Assess your environment. Start with an assessment. Don't make decisions, commitments. Start with an assessment. Understand what you have in your environment, what is tied to what. Understand what's easy to move and high impact, what's difficult to move and high impact. And then prioritize what you want to move so that you are building your team for success. So easy to move and low impact, they'll have success. They'll build on it. They'll feel confident. They'll learn more. And it's a much seamless route of migrating. Understand what you can get for free from your cloud providers. So Google provides Stratazone assessments, provides different types of assessments. And also, if you are interested in expanding your DevOps practices, you can do a DORA assessment, which takes a look at your DevOps practices and explains to you helps you build out a plan for how you can upgrade your DevOps practices. So start with an assessment. And then, as I said, take the results of your assessment, build out a plan, start slow, small, build confidence, build skill, and then your growth will be exponential. Your abilities and your team's happiness will be much better. So that's the recommendations from my side.
Yeah, good. Wonderful advice. I do want it because sometimes when I've spoken to people about cloud migrations, it is because you're migrating an application. You're migrating like you're migrating a piece of user functionality from one platform to another, and I think that's the way to think about it. Not servers. So let me get to excuse me. So now we've kind of we spoke about a lot about negativity, a lot of risk. Now I think everybody's thinking like this is going to cost me a fortune. Better get those billing alerts set up right now. Let's talk a bit more positively. So Michelle, like what were some of the best decisions you made early on in, your cloud migration or other kind of cloud strategies that you've done that really set you up for success?
I'd say this was a decision before I joined the cloud infrastructure team at my last job. But one of the first things that team built was a billing pipeline to take the billing data and be able to surface it to internal teams and tie it to applications. So we had really fine-grained information on which so Square does a micro account. So each application will have usually around 3 AWS accounts, dev, staging, prod. And we had fine-grained billing data for all of that. And that was set up very early on so that people could track spending over time. But also as an organization, we could aggregate billing and see, oh, why are we suddenly spending 2 times more in Dynamo each month, and understand, oh, it's this account. Okay, who owns that application that's associated with that account? And then go ask them what they're doing. So having that information was incredibly useful as cloud usage started increasing, because if someone's spending $6 a month, an enterprise doesn't care. We had the next thing we did was we kind of had internal cost thresholds for like, is this in terms of how much is this going to cost a year? Is like a dinner at a Michelin star restaurant. It was like a cheap dinner, a dinner at a Michelin restaurant, a Honda car, and then a private jet. And our rule was logarithmic. But at the same time, it's like our finance people didn't really need to get involved immediately unless it was you're going to spend a private jet. So having that kind of grade for people to understand, because as soon as you start getting costs into your culture, people will be like, can I spend $6 a month on this? And it's like, well, yeah, you can. We don't really care about $6 a month. But having those thresholds made it really easy for people to understand at what point they needed to get our team involved or finance involved. And there was kind of piggybacking on what Joel was saying, the starting small and having, I think of it as kind of a snowball effect, where instead of cloud tends to have not just a long tail at the end, but a long tail at the beginning, where you start small, you start using cloud for little things, you start building up that knowledge, and then you start seeing it ramp, where people are like, oh, you should use Dynamo for this because you're having problems scaling your database. Why do another MySQL shard? You've already sharded once, you're going to reshard. That's annoying. Why don't you just migrate to Dynamo? And people within the company build up that knowledge. And the last point I want to make kind of relates to that. We also, one of the things I've seen be successful is integrating cloud into your engineering documents. So I've used engineering design doc templates. So if your company has a process for doing it, adding a little section on cloud architecture, cloud costs, especially in terms of how will your costs scale with your customers? Is it going to be a 1-to-1? Is it going to be a cost scale 5 times for every one customer you add, depending on your business model? Understanding that because we all know, hopefully most of us here are in agreement, cloud costs is the same as cloud architecture. So you pay for what you build, you pay for what you use. So, you can choose to have your costs mitigated in different ways. So if a team came to us and was like, hey, we're going to do this thing, and we're like, every customer is going to be spinning up a VM, and maybe it's a B2C, and you're like, oh, that might not be a great idea. So you'll want to figure out how to do that. And again, by integrating it into like an engineering design doc, it becomes part of the culture because everyone sees it, everyone asks questions. And then again, it kind of builds up the company's level of expertise with cloud. And, I think we've all heard of stories from these cloud centers of excellence that don't necessarily work. And it's, as we've all said, it's about bringing everyone with you.
That's a really good point. I think if I'm reading between summarizing what you're saying, I like it's almost like the feedback loop. So adding what did you call it, the billing tracking, the fine-grained billing tracking is kind of giving that feedback loop to people early on instead of that report every quarter. You're giving that feedback loop straight away, and also then if you're the thing you were just describing right now, which is blowing my mind, but that's again like a feedback loop. So you're giving people, that information sooner, so they can make decisions quicker. Yeah. Oh, the design stage. Sorry, the design stage, like having that thinking early on in the design process gives you that feedback. Yeah, I like that a lot. I like this. Nice and positive. It's good. Frank, let's stay positive. So what are some of your best decisions you've made early on that set up a migration for success?
Yeah, I really like Michelle's response there. And I think I would just add to that, instead of not only bringing the billing conversation to the forefront and socializing and making everyone aware of that, the same thing with privacy and security. I think that would be your next stop after the billing and how much this is going to cost is going to be privacy and security. Securing yourself in the cloud, securing your data, your customers' data in the cloud, and then making sure that it is privacy compliant. And that conversation being early in the process, not something that you're just trying to bolt on at the end, a week before production. So your conversations with your privacy and security team should be very early on in the process, and understanding the specific nuances of what this is going to look like in cloud. I know we're on the positive side, but like one quick horror story at a previous company that I worked for. They had moved their version control system to the cloud. So they're kind of testing out what this was going to look like. And they hadn't considered all the things that kind of come into play now that you're in the cloud. And this is right around the time when the very first like smart refrigerators were rolling out. And a developer who happened to be shopping at one of the company's stores on the weekend went up to one of the smart refrigerators, which was on the store's network, and was able to go and log into the version control system from Samsung smart refrigerator. And that was a real wake up call for that team, and they were able to come back and regroup. Okay, we need to really consider our VPC and maybe segmenting the stores from the operations center. And we also probably need to start a conversation about what 2FA or MFA is going to look like for our organization now that we're in the cloud. So yeah, summarize all that. Same thing with socializing finance and making that like having a culture of fiscal responsibility. You want to have a culture of privacy and security, and not just relying on your privacy and security team to secure everything.
It's fascinating. You can do a Git checkout on a fridge. Never knew that. So Joel, I think do you have anything? Do you have anything? Any good advice? Any positive news here that you want to share?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to. I heard what Michelle was saying, and I just wanted to reiterate how important taking into consideration the finance aspect together with your architecture Because, for example, I'm going to the world of Kubernetes because that's kind of where I live nowadays. A lot of it's got to be part of your decision making. Is the priority for your company cost saving? Is it reliability? Is it separating customers? So one example, some companies want to charge customers by what they use. And then, oh, how do we do this? Okay, now we want to set up a cluster per customer, and that will cost us a lot of money and it'll be complex to use. Do we want to have a single cluster separated into namespaces? And how do we build that and make that cost effective? Super important to have when you're building out your cloud architecture, product, finance, and the engineering teams to make it a viable thing. Because a lot of the decisions that you'll make at the beginning will be depending on the company culture, but can be very difficult to change down the line. So I really wanted to iterate on what Michelle was saying there.
Yeah, good point, good addition. We've got a couple of minutes left, and we have one question from the audience. I'd just like to ask that to. I'm going to read it out, and if anybody feels particularly inclined to answer it, put up your hand, and I'll come to you. If not, I'm going to pick someone. So from Bob in the audience, so any recommended resources or advice for build versus buy decisions, especially with regards to usage of managed services in a cloud environment and avoiding resume-driven development? I actually don't even know what resume-driven development is. So I saw Michelle, you put your hand up first. Why don't you go ahead? And I'll go to you first.
Yeah, similar to what I said about costs, one of the other things that I've seen work in the past is when you're building out your internal development tooling, you choose what level of friction you want people to experience. So you want someone just wants to run their, application container with the MySQL database or Dynamo database, but they don't care where the container runs. They're fine using your internal path. Make that really easy. And let's say you're a company that doesn't really want people to use VMs, so make VMs really hard. So I think it's understanding what level of support you're willing to have, because obviously the further you go down the stack, the more support you're going to need to provide to your infrastructure. A VM in the cloud is, yes, a little bit less work than a VM in a data center, but at the end of the day, you're still managing bare metal. You still have to deal with all the networking, the security implications, the patching, and also rollout tooling, because it's going to be probably a little bit different than what you're used to. So my default when I go to anything cloud is, what is the highest level managed service I can use? Does it fit my needs? And then go down from there, because I want my teams and my organization to spend time fixing business problems and things that are going to add value to the business. And patching VMs, while yes, it mitigates a security risk, unless it's a very specific thing that's not going to add as much value to the business. So someone saying, here's a container, go run it, and now I'm going to work on the business logic. Now I'm going to work on building a new system to integrate with some third party for some new feature, et cetera. So that's kind of my advice is start, manage, go down. I will caveat that by saying, as I've done a lot of work in serverless world with Lambda, it can take a bit more time for people to get used to those kinds of workings. Like, people are used to containers, but when you go serverless, it's a bit more of a mind shift. But at the end of the day, it can also be hugely cost saving if it's used in the right way.
Yeah, good point. So buy by default, but then build if it gives you an advantage in other areas. So Joel, we've only got a couple of minutes left. I'll ask you just to, if you can, just quickly give your thoughts on that as well, and then we'll
So 100% agree with Michelle. I would say even more for small companies, startups, where you don't have people to manage infrastructure. Use what the cloud providers give you. They're managed. It'll save you a lot of time, a lot of effort. I think going towards the build is when you have these outlier scenarios. I need something to have a response in 3 milliseconds. Right? Then might have to build something for yourself, and just take into consideration cost is not only paying for a service, but building a team, training the team, operating a team to operate the service. That's also cost that needs to be taken into consideration. So that's that.
Wonderful. Yeah, good additions. So then we've reached the end. So I wanted to thank all of you for being part of this panel. We heard a lot today about governance and strategy for cloud migration. We touched on various things, the risks, the strategies, and also the pitfalls you've had, and also the positive advice you'd give. I think some of the takeaways I've gathered from this is focus on the people. I think you all agreed on this aspect of it, which was you've got to take your people with you, you've got to train them up, and you've also got to speak to everybody who's engaged and who'll be involved and touched by the cloud migration. And I heard cost almost every answer, to be honest with you, like all the way through this, which isn't, I think, a horror story, because it can reduce costs as well. But it's also an opportunity. So that's something to be warned, and something definitely to pay attention to. So thank you all so much for all of the good insights in today's panel. We're all going to be heading over now to the LeadDev Slack in the technical strategy channel. Please head there to continue the discussion. Thanks for joining, and we hope to see you next time.